There is a weapon more powerful than missiles, more influential than aircraft carriers, and capable of collapsing entire economies without firing a single shot. It does not explode. It does not invade. It does not occupy territory. It moves through banks, trade routes, energy markets, and digital transfers. And for more than 70 years, it has shaped the balance of global power. That weapon is the United States dollar. To understand how a currency became a geopolitical force, we must begin not with money, but with destruction. We need to return to 1945. The world economy was fractured. Europe's industrial base had been bombed repeatedly. Germany's cities were flattened. Britain was financially exhausted. France's infrastructure was damaged. Across Asia, Japan's urban centers had been devastated, and China had endured years of invasion and civil conflict. Global trade routes had been disrupted, shipping capacity was strained, and many national currencies were unstable or worthless. The Great Depression of the 1930s had already demonstrated how fragile interconnected economies could be. Competitive devaluations, protectionist tariffs, and financial panic had deepened that crisis and contributed to political extremism. Policymakers understood that if post-war reconstruction followed the same chaotic pattern, another global conflict might not be far behind. The United States, however, stood in a uniquely powerful position. Unlike Europe or Asia, its industrial base had not been bombed. During the war, American factories had expanded dramatically to supply military equipment to both domestic forces and allied nations. By 1945, the United States produced roughly half of the world's manufactured goods. It also held the majority of global gold reserves, accumulated through wartime trade surpluses and financial flows. This economic dominance created an opportunity. In July 1944, while the war was still ongoing, delegates from 44 countries met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their objective was not merely reconstruction, but systemic redesign. They sought to create a stable monetary order that would prevent competitive devaluations, encourage trade, and support long-term growth. The result was the Bretton Woods system. Under this arrangement, national currencies would be pegged to the U.S. dollar, and the dollar itself would be convertible into gold at a fixed rate. In practical terms, this meant that the dollar became the reference point for global finance. Countries could stabilize their currencies by tying them to the dollar, and because the dollar was linked to gold, it carried an implicit guarantee of value. This system had several important consequences. First, it simplified international trade. Exchange rates were predictable, reducing risk for exporters and importers. Second, it increased demand for dollars, because central banks needed dollar reserves to maintain their currency pegs. Third, it placed the United States at the center of global liquidity. However, Bretton Woods was only part of the story. Economic reconstruction required capital, and Europe did not have enough of it internally. Through the Marshall Plan, the United States provided billions of dollars in aid to rebuild Western European economies. This assistance was not purely altruistic. It stimulated demand for American goods, strengthened political stability, and integrated European markets into a dollar-based trading system. As European economies recovered and industrialized, global trade expanded rapidly. The dollar became the primary currency for international settlements. Major commodities, including oil, were increasingly priced in dollars. Multinational corporations conducted cross-border business in dollars because it was stable and widely accepted. By the 1960s, the dollar was no longer simply backed by gold. It was backed by network effects. The more countries used it, the more useful it became. In 1971, when the United States ended the dollar's convertibility into gold, many believed the system would collapse. Yet by that time, global dependence on the dollar had grown so strong that its central role persisted. Oil-producing nations continued pricing crude in dollars, reinforcing what became known as the petrodollar system. Any country importing oil needed dollars to pay for it, which meant holding dollar reserves or earning them through exports. Simultaneously, American financial markets deepened and expanded. U.S. Treasury bonds became a benchmark for safety. Wall Street evolved into the most influential financial center in the world. Investors valued the size, transparency, and liquidity of American markets. In times of uncertainty, capital often flowed into dollar-denominated assets rather than away from them. This dynamic created what economists sometimes describe as the exorbitant privilege. Because global trade and finance relied on dollars, the United States could borrow at relatively low interest rates and run persistent trade deficits without triggering immediate collapse. Foreign governments recycled their dollar earnings into U.S. debt markets, effectively financing American spending. Over time, the strategic implications became clear. When international transactions clear through banks that operate within the dollar system, regulatory authority expands. If a country or institution is denied access to dollar clearing networks, it can find itself effectively isolated from large segments of global commerce. This mechanism underpins modern sanctions policy. Rather than deploying troops, governments can restrict financial access. Companies, banks, and even entire states can be cut off from capital flows and trade settlement systems. The impact can be immediate and severe. Currency values can plummet. Imports become expensive or unavailable. Investment confidence erodes. Economic contraction follows. These outcomes occur not because infrastructure is physically destroyed, but because participation in the financial system is restricted. Importantly, this power is not absolute. It depends on trust in American institutions, legal frameworks, and political stability. Investors must believe contracts will be enforced. Central banks must believe reserves are secure. Global markets must perceive continuity in policy. The dollar's dominance is sustained not only by scale but by credibility. At the same time, rival powers have sought alternatives. Some nations have pursued bilateral trade agreements denominated in local currencies. Others have increased gold holdings as a hedge against financial dependency. New payment systems have been developed to reduce reliance on traditional clearing channels. Digital currencies and central bank digital currencies introduce additional complexity into the future of global finance, yet replacing the dollar involves more than technological substitution. It requires constructing deep and liquid capital markets, establishing global trust in regulatory systems, ensuring military and political stability, and integrating allies into a shared financial architecture. Such transformations historically unfold over decades, not years. The broader lesson is that monetary dominance reflects structural design. After World War II, the United States did not simply export goods, it exported a framework. That framework linked trade, finance, energy markets, and security alliances into a cohesive system. The dollar became the unit through which that system functioned. Military power remains significant, but financial architecture shapes the boundaries within which nations operate. Access to capital determines development. Currency stability influences inflation. Reserve holdings affect crisis management. The ability to transact globally influences economic resilience. The dollar became the most powerful weapon in history, not because it destroys adversaries directly, but because it defines participation in the global economy. It operates quietly, embedded in contracts, reserves, and electronic transfers. It reinforces alliances and constrains adversaries. It amplifies influence during stability and often strengthens during crisis. Whether this dominance endures indefinitely remains uncertain. Economic power shifts over time, and technological change can disrupt established systems. However, the architecture constructed in the mid-20th century continues to shape the 21st. Understanding that architecture reveals something deeper about modern power. Control of territory once determined influence. Today, control of systems may matter more. Financial networks, reserve currencies, and trade infrastructures shape outcomes in ways that are less visible but often more enduring. If you found this interesting, hit subscribe and stick around. Here we break down the real systems behind global power, the strategies behind superpowers, and the forces that quietly shape the world you live in. Because the biggest battles aren't always fought with weapons. Sometimes they're fought with systems, and we're just getting started. See you soon.